এই মহেন্দ্ৰ গোহাঁই মানে মই এতিয়া টেষ্টটো মই দি দিছিলো মই কোনো কথা তেনেকুৱা এজন মানুহে
মানে ইয়াৰে ক্লাছ কৰাই ভালচোন ন, ক্লাছ
আজিকালি আমি 6টা বজাত আৰম্ভ কৰিম দেই। 6টা বজাত জইন কৰিব। আৰু 5 মিনিট।
ছাৰ শুনি পাইছেনে?
শুনি পাইছো। হেল্ল' সুভাষ মই
শুনি
শুনিছো।
পাইছে? অ'।
6টা বজাত আৰম্ভ কৰিম আৰু।
ঠিক আছে।
সুভাষ
ঠিক আছে ছাৰ। হেল্ল'।
হেল্ল'। সুভাষ 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 সুভাষ
হয় ছাৰ।
জইন কৰিছে।
হয়
জইন কৰিছে।
হয় ছাৰ। প্ৰিন্সিপাল ছাৰ জইন কৰিলে নেকি? দেখা নাই কিন্তু। আমি ছাৰে জইন কৰাৰ পিছতে ষ্টাৰ্ট কৰিব পাৰিম আৰু।
দেখা নাই।
হয়।
চিন্তা কৰিছে নাই?
ছাৰক দেখা নাই এতিয়ালৈকে। হয়তো কৰিব অলপতে।
Hello, Yuvraj. Yuvraj.
Hi, sir.
দেখিছা মই ওলাইছো নে মই
Hi, sir. Hi, দেখিছে।
মাতটো শুনিছা
হয়, sir. Sir, আৰম্ভ কৰিব পাৰিনে?
আমাৰ বৰুণ জইন কৰিলে নি
কৰিলে, হয়, ৰিচোৰ্চ পাৰ্চনে কৰিলে।
কৰিলে আৰম্ভ কৰি
হয়, হয়, sir. হয়। নমস্কাৰ। Honorable Principal of Gorgaon College, Dr. Satyakshi Mohanto, respected resource person of today's webinar, Dr. Borun De, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, Dibrugarh University, respected HOD, Political Science, Gorgaon College, Dr. Pawan Gogoi, respected HOD, Political Science, Department of, Sonari College, respected Vice Principal of Gorgaon College, Dr. Rina Hendik, respected faculty members of Gorgaon College and Sonari College, esteemed audience and my dear students, I welcome you all to this webinar on social movements, which is jointly organized by Department of Political Science, Gorgaon College and Sonari College in collaboration with IQAC Gorgaon College. So without further ado, I request Honorable Principal of Gorgaon College, Dr. Satyakshi Mohanto, sir, to deliver his inaugural address. Sir, please proceed. Yes, sir. Over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Yuvraj. A very good evening to you all. Dr. Rina Hendik, Vice Principal of Gorgaon College, Dr. Pawan Kumar Gogoi, HOD Department of Political Science, Gorgaon College, and HOD Department of Political Science, Sonari College. Today's resource person, Dr. Borun De, Assistant Professor in the Department of Political Science, Dibrugarh University, respected teachers, and my dear students. This is indeed an excellent endeavor on part of the Department of Political Science and Department of Political Science of Gorgaon College and Department of Political Science of Sonari College. They have been jointly organized this webinar on social movements and its impact on Indian democracy. It will definitely benefit the teachers as well as the students. I'm really very sorry. Actually, I have been busy in some documentation, which I have to send it by this evening to the office of the Director of Higher Education within an hour. So I was busy with that. I'm really very sorry for joining little late. Anyway, আজি যিটো উদ্যোগ লৈছে আমাৰ ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগ গড়গাঁও কলেজৰ আৰু সোণাৰী কলেজৰ, আমি এই উদ্যোগৰ শলাগ লৈছো আৰু এই বিষয়টো যিটো ছ'চিয়েল মুভমেণ্টছ এণ্ড ইটছ ইম্পেক্ট অন ডেমক্ৰেচি, আৰু আমাৰ এজন লাৰ্নেড আমাৰ যথেষ্ট তেখেত অভিজ্ঞ আৰু এজন মেধাৱী অধ্যাপক ডক্টৰ বৰুণ দে আছে, তেখেতে এই সন্দৰ্ভত মূল বক্তৃতা প্ৰদান কৰিব। মই মাত্ৰ এটা কথাই ক'ব বিচাৰিছো যে যেতিয়াই আমাৰ ডেমক্ৰেচিৰ কথা কোৱা হয়, ডেমক্ৰেচিয়ে সদায় জাষ্টিছৰ কথা কয়, লিবাৰ্টিৰ কথা কয়, ইকুৱেলিটিৰ কথা কয়। গতিকে জাষ্টিছ বুলি কোৱাৰ লগে লগে আমাৰ প্ৰিএম্বুলত এই গোটেই কথাখিনি আছে যে ছ'চিয়েল জাষ্টিছ, political justice and economic justice, and every social movement for the cause of social justice. আমাৰ সামাজিক ন্যায় প্ৰতিষ্ঠাৰ কাৰণে আচলতে প্ৰত্যেকটো ছ'চিয়েল মুভমেণ্ট হয়, তাৰ সমান্তৰালভাৱে তাত অৰ্থনৈতিক অধিকাৰ বা অৰ্থনৈতিক ন্যায় বা ৰাজনৈতিক ন্যায় প্ৰশ্নটো জড়িত হৈ থাকে। নিশ্চয়কৈ আমাৰ ডক্টৰ বৰুণ দে এই গোটেই কথাখিনি পুংখানুপুংখভাৱে বিশ্লেষণ কৰিব। মই উদ্যোক্তাসকলৰ শলাগ লৈছো। আপোনালোকে এই যিটো উদ্যোগ লৈছে, ৱেবিনাৰৰ জৰিয়তে হ'লেও আমাৰ ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীসকলৰ এটা বিশেষ বিষয়ৰ সন্দৰ্ভত তেওঁলোকক কিছু সম্যক ধাৰণা দিয়াৰ, সম্যক জ্ঞান দিয়াৰ মই এই আপাহতে উদ্যোক্তাসকলৰ প্ৰতি আন্তৰিক ধন্যবাদ জনাইছো। আৰু মই আশা কৰিম বৰুণ দেৰ আজি ডক্টৰ বৰুণ দে যিখিনি বক্তব্য আগবঢ়াব, সেই বক্তব্যখিনিৰ পৰা ছাত্ৰ ছাত্ৰীসকল বিদ্যায়তনিক দিশত, বৌদ্ধিক দিশত যথেষ্টখিনি উপকৃত হ'ব। I wish you all the best and hope the entire session would be beneficial, not only for the students, that would be beneficial for our teachers also. And I would also like to request our organizers to hold such type of webinars in future also, so that our student can be benefited from that. Wishing you all the best, আৰু আজিৰ এই অনুষ্ঠানটি সামগ্ৰিকভাৱে সফলতা কামনা কৰি এই অনুষ্ঠানটি উদ্বোধন কৰা হ'ল বুলি ঘোষণা কৰিছো। আৰু সকলোকে মই গড়গাঁও কলেজৰ অধ্যক্ষ হিচাপে আজিৰ অনুষ্ঠানটোলৈ আন্তৰিক আদৰণি জনাইছো। ধন্যবাদ।
Thank you so much, sir, for your encouraging words and for inaugurating the webinar. Now, before handing over the floor of the webinar to our resource person, Dr. Borun De, let me introduce him to you first. Dr. Borun De is an assistant professor of political science at Dibrugarh University. Areas of specialization and interest and state politics, and he has published extensively research papers in various national and international level journals. And apart from that, he has also participated in various conferences, workshops, and seminars at the national and international level. Sir, it is a really pleasure to have you on. Without any further ado, I would like to hand over the floor of the webinar to you. Sir, please proceed.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, so good evening to you all. Esteemed principal of Gorgao College, Dr. Hobbahasi Mohanto Dangoria, the fraternity of Shonari College, esteemed participants, and student friends. So, this evening in this webinar, I have been given the topic that is social movement and its impact on democracy. So, we all have been very much familiar with the notion and the implications of social movement. Of course, this is not a new phenomenon in our socio-political cultural life. and at the same time, how it links with democracy, whether democracy is promoted or hindered through social movements. All these will be there in my discussion. So first, I would like to let you know the very structure of my lecture today on this very topic. First, I will try to conceptualize social movement, and conceptually and theoretically, we'll know how social movements have been different from other, kind of day-to-day agitations, agitational programs, etc. Then we'll be understanding how we can distinguish any agitation as a kind of social movement, its components, and definitely then we'll be understanding the interplay and interface between social movements and democracy in general, India in particular. And of course, while delivering my lecture, I will also concentrate on the issues of Assam too. So let me start. As I said, that social movement and democracy, these are very much related to each other. We all know that any kind of social movement is not possible, is meaningless without having democracy. A democratic setup only can ensure having social movements. Otherwise, we all know about the students' movements in China, which was much bulldozed by the system. So, any kind of social movement, to have their existence, must have to have a kind of democratic setup. I will come to that, but as proposed, first, I will try to conceptualize and theorize social movement. Achha. So, if any of us, if we are asked to start any of the stories, right? We all are familiar with stories, any kind of story. And basically, in our childhood, what we used to learn is that while starting any kind of story, we started like Ekomoyot Ejon Raja Asile. Once upon a time, there was a king. Of course, there was not queen, and that aspect nowadays it's quite familiar to us. So once upon a time, there was a king. That means the whole notion of understanding politics, understanding our socio-political economic structure was structured from the above, right? Everything was understood academically also. Initially, when we started the understanding of politics, it was understood from the above. Comparative government started with that. We tried to understand the executive, legislature, judiciary from the above. Executive, legislature, judiciary. That means we understood politics from the above, but not from the below. But we all know that the politics at the below can never be missed out while understanding politics from true sense of the term. Politics to be understood must have to understand the dynamics from the above as well as from the below, without which deeper understanding of politics is not at all possible. I think all of us will be agreeing with that, right? So the mass politics from the below is to be understood for holistic understanding of politics. And social movements are in fact the engagements, the dynamics of the people from the below. Have we seen any kind of movement being initiated by the ruling regimes? No. Social movements are always being initiated by the people engaged at the below for different reasons. I'll come to that. So first and foremost thing is that social movement, understanding of social movement will make us competent to understand politics from true sense. Say, I will give you one example. Say we want to understand the very birth and dynamics of, say, Akhom Jatiyo Porikhod, or for that region, say Akhom Gana Porikhod. So can we understand their dynamics, their mobilization without understanding Assam movement? No. And what is Assam movement? That is engagement of people from the below, issues from the below. So my first point is that understanding social movements will make us competent to understand politics from true sense. Therefore, it's not that once upon a time there was only the king. Once upon a time there was also the people at large from the below. Of course, there are other dynamics too. I will come to that. Now, understanding the importance of social movements in our academic disciplines, now I will concentrate on how social movements are different from the rest agitations. Say in our day-to-day life, we always come across some agitational programs, right? Say in your colleges, anything may happen at any point of time, in any of the institutions, anywhere, right? Say some of the students of Gorgaon College and Shonari College, they have been going to a field trip. And suddenly what happened that in the bus, they were attacked by some other persons. And then what happened that all the students, they jumped on that, called police, they called the nearby college students, and they set for a dharna because their rights were curtailed. So that is also a kind of agitation. Now, whether that's a social movement, obviously not, right? It's not a social movement, but it's a sporadic event. It's a kind of sporadic event. It's not at all a social movement. So now how can we distinguish academically what exactly is social movement, what is not a kind of social movement, right? So for that reason, we need to go, I'll make much simple, right? Say, for example, the frame social movement is comprised of two words. One is social and the other is movements. So social is all about which comes from the society. It's collective in nature. And movements, I mean move. It comes from move. I mean, we always move from one place to the other, from one yardstick to the other, isn't it? Say, for example, people from Majuli, they move from Majuli to Jorhat for natural calamities, or in some cases, reverse migration is also there, like people from Jorhat may also go to Majuli. So why do people move from one place to the other? That's in fact the core understanding of social movement. Why do people move? Say, I in my personal life, why should I move? Why do I move? Definitely for betterment, isn't it? the question, the context of betterment is related with movement. I do move to get betterment in my life, isn't it? Of course, that's a kind of perceived notion of betterment. Do you get my point? I said this is perceived notion of betterment. I am perceiving that I will get betterment while moving from this place to the other. But in fact, in practice, I may not witness that betterment too. That is obviously different issue. But the thing is that we move for betterment, and that notion of betterment is perceived or conceived, isn't it? So social movements are in fact also conceptualized as some collective efforts for betterment. Now, what is that betterment? I already said that this concept of betterment is relative, number one, and number two, this is kind of perceived or conceived notion. Number two, what is betterment? The concept of betterment in social movement, Hamajik Andolon. So what is that? That is the social change. Do you get my point? Social change is the most inevitable element in any kind of social movement. And we can distinguish it. Say that when the students, I gave the example, when the students, they made any kind of untoward situation and they set for dharna. So that was kind of situational response, which was not having any kind of relation with social change. So that's why we cannot term that as social movement. Right? So social movement to be, it must have to have collective in nature. I mean, collectively, it's a collective endeavor, number one. And number two, it's for social change. Do you get my point? Social change and social movements are closely related. So, why do people initiate movements, social movements? For betterment. And what is that concept notion of betterment? That is for social change. That means people want change. Now you can ask me questions, what kind of change it is? Of course, perceived. Now, thing is that notion of change is having two dimensions. See, number one is, maybe to promote change. We want change, and that's why we initiate social movements. Say, for example, I will give you one example, like in case of us, I will give a local example like Assam movement, which was started in 1979, ended in 85. Question is that the Assamese intelligentsia led by caste Hindu based Assamese middle class, they initiated this Assam movement to detect and deport illegal immigrants. Right? So the point is that they did not want the influx, if any, to continue. Right? Immigration, they did not want the immigration to continue. So that means they wanted to bring changes. They wanted to bring changes through detection and deportation of the so-called illegal immigrants. So they wanted to bring change in the socio-political and economic life of Assam. So in that way, Assam movement, initiators of Assam movement wanted to promote change or to bring change. They welcomed the change. They initiated the movement to bring changes. On the other hand, you have some movements which are to, number two, the dimension of change. One, I have already said, to promote change. And the second one is to, resist the change. Now, how will you resist the change? Say, for example, the last movement against Citizenship Amendment Bill and Act, CAB and CA, wherein you had a kind of bill or the subsequent act against which agitations were seen, movements were initiated. So that means what? It was a movement to resist the change. Government of India brought one change in the form of amendment in the then existing Citizenship Amendment Act. And then initiators of movements, they did not welcome that. Instead, they wanted to go against it. That means they wanted to resist the change. So democracy, social movement, these are linked in two ways. One is that either bringing the change or by bringing or promoting the change, and then it is through resisting the change. Okay, so this dimension of change is very much important, and that is social change, either in the form of promotion or resistance. Say Lower Subansiri hydroelectric project, the movement that what we have witnessed here erstwhile. So that was also a kind of movement which resisted the change. Okay, so social movements and social change, notion of social change are very much interlinked. Now, what are the other factors in social movements through which we can distinguish any kind of social movement from other kind of agitations, day-to-day agitations? Now, after change, as I already said, that this is, collective endeavor, number one. Number two, social change. Number three, who will bring that change? Who proposes to bring that change, either in the form of promotion or resistance? The organization. Do get my point? So always it is the organization which has been one of the important elements of social movement, followed by leadership, organizational leadership. Okay, and they have their own fixed objectives. Say in case of Assam movement, we had initially, of course, it was against the Bahiragataj, to throw away the Bahiragataj, and then Bidekhi, it was taken up. So that was the objective, that to detect and deport the illegal immigrants, so-called illegal immigrants. Okay, and then of course ideology. Any kind of social movement must have to be guided by strict ideology. So, and at the same time, they need to the organizational leadership. They need to take appropriate programs of action, like agitations, dharna, whatever. Democratic, parliamentary and constitutional means to be adopted in the form of program which are in adherence to their objectives already framed, being guided by ideology. So from these we can define what social movements are. I will not go to the definitional part. So what exactly social movement is then, through all these whatever I told? So we can say that social movements are collective endeavors for social change. These are being initiated by organizations and their leadership being backed by their objectives, initiate programs, and they are being guided by strict ideology. So while dealing with its impact, their impacts in democracy, these elements need to be evaluated and re-evaluated. Say the last movement against Citizenship Amendment Act, what was the result? To understand the result, to understand whether democratization was strengthened or promoted by this movement or not, we need to understand or evaluate rather the functioning of the organizational leadership, the objectives they had and the ideology, whether it was followed or not. Right? So in that way, we can understand the interface between social movements and democracy. I will come to that. Now, point is that we all know that any kind of social movement, take the example from Northeast, from India or elsewhere also, globally, all social movements are in fact political in nature. Because social movements interact with power, the centers of power. Social movements interact with the state, right? Social movements interact with the political establishments. Meaning what? What can we inference? The inference is that social movements, all social movements in fact, are political in nature. But all political movements cannot be social in nature. Rajni Kothari, the father of Indian political science, he, through his notion of direct action, tried to understand all these very aptly. You can go through. Now, now understanding all these, now social movements have been theorized from different corners. You all know that throughout the ages we have social movements. Although academically we have in the last century only, but in the streets, on the streets, social movements have been there from the ages, and they have their impacts throughout the ages, throughout history. Okay, say remarkably 1688, the Glorious Revolution, we all know the impacts brought into by Glorious Revolution. 1776, American War of Independence. 1789, France Revolution, Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, Indian independence, Indian national movement, and other subsequent movements in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and subsequently in the post-independent India and elsewhere. Till date, the LGBTQ rights, movements for LGBTQ rights. Okay, so all these have been having far more impacts for the society, polity, economy at large. Okay, we can assess academically how these aspects, how these dynamics of social movements have been having their impacts in democracy, whether democracy is threatened, democracy is strengthened, or what. Okay, so for that, we have the Marxist interpretation, obviously, which understood the whole dynamics from the angle, from the prism of economy and class. In fact, the classical social movements were basically by the working class or the peasants in different societies, right? And what Marx visualized was a kind of working class movement, proletariat's movement, which in fact was a working class. And he visualized a kind of total revolution by doing away the state and the kind of class, isn't it? And initially in Assam also, elsewhere also, we had these types of movements, working class movements, kind of peasants movements like Pothoru Ghator Ron. After the penetration of the Britishers into the land of Assam, peasants had their real problems, genuine problems. And we know that how they could mobilize themselves. They mobilized and they took up a kind of movement, right? So although in the post-independent phenomenon is that movements are being initiated by the middle class, right? Okay, so that is the Marxian notion, and Marx said that social movements may be initiated by any means. End is the most important one. We need to achieve the end, that is the classless and stateless society, but means you can adopt any of the means, wherein you have the Gandhian notion. Gandhian approach is different in this regard. Gandhi said that we need a good end, but a good end can only be achieved through a good means. Then you have the liberal approach, you have the resource mobilization approach, relative deprivation approach. Relative deprivation, I'll come to that, all these approaches. The relative deprivation approach is very much apt in understanding the dynamics of Northeast India. Okay, so these theories try to understand the dynamics of social movement from different angles. The classical social movements were basically being understood by the Marxian framework, but after 1960s, basically after the behavioral revolution, we have witnessed many changes globally, in the developing countries, in the developed countries. Globally, we have witnessed much changes in the socio-political and cultural life. And then on the streets also, we have witnessed different types of movements, which were not necessarily only by the peasants and the workers. We had different types of other agitational programs witnessed on the streets. And therefore, academically also, we had to have new framework to understand all these movements. Now see, as I said that from 1960s, a kind of new framework got developed to understand the dynamics of social movements academically. But what necessitated it to have a new framework? Because on the streets, when social movements were going on, we had witnessed different types of movements, different dynamics were seen in terms of objectives, in terms of agitational programs. Now say, for example, say now we have women's movement, right? We have movement for the rights of LGBTQ, environmental movements, movements for peace, movements for, green life. So all these are not similar with the kind of dynamics what we witnessed before, prior to 1960s. Of course, it is not that you cannot separate the line of the separation, although I am making distinct, yes, but the thing is that earlier also we had these types of phenomenon to some extent, but not that much distinct. Distinction came after 1960s globally, and that's why we had to have new framework of understanding academically, and these are known as new social movements. Now I'll let you know how new social movements are different from the classical social movements, and then only we can understand how these are also linked with democracy or democratization. Now the point is that new social movement, as you know, the classical social movements are always directed towards the state. They always negate the state. But new social movements not necessarily always go against the state. They may not go against the state always. They may go, but in some cases they may not go. In fact, new social movements, the organizations involved, they may in fact negotiate with the state, right? For their own benefits. To get their things done, new social movements can negotiate with the state, okay? And they may demand autonomy. So now 6th schedule is being demanded. autonomous council is being demanded, ST status is being demanded, separate state is being demanded. So the organizations concerned, they have been initiating movements and they have been negotiating with the state. They have been demanding in front of the state through their agitational programs. So they may not always go against the state. Okay. Secondly, as we all know that classical social movements were basically being backed by economy. Of course, I don't say that new social movements are not at all based on economy. Obviously, economy is the core. And in today's context also, economy plays a vital role that cannot be undermined. But other factors are also there in the society, like culture, right? Is much important. Now say, nowadays we have been witnessing the overwhelming celebration of the community festivals in almost all the communities, right? Why it is that? Maybe to assert or reassert the very identity of the community concerned. So that may not be only for economy, right? So culture plays an important role. Other personal aspects are more important in community life. So these are much more important in new social movements. And at the same time, classical social movements were much class-based. As I said, proletariat, bourgeois, landlords, tenants. I mean, altogether class-based. But obviously, like economy, class is much important to understand the society. We cannot understand any of the phenomena of the society without understanding the context of class, obviously. But along with class, you have other aspects too. Nowadays, we have multi-class dimension. Say women movement, say Greenpeace movement. I have given you the examples. Identity movements, autonomy movements. Obviously, class angle is there. It cannot be avoided, and it's a very important, even theoretical debate. It's a theoretical debate whether new social movements are without class. And some of the West protagonists, they've been arguing that, in fact, that new social movements are not at all class-based. But we, from this corner of the globe, and in fact, our own scholars, they don't agree with that. And in fact, in our society, we know how economy plays its role. Even at this point in 2023 in India, we have been witnessing how class, the context of class plays its role in every corner, in every sphere of our life, of our community life. That's why, although I said that classical social movements are entirely based on class, but now class is having its own importance, but it may be multi-class. Civil society plays its role now. Civil society tries to get strengthened. It's not that it always goes against the state. It tries to get strengthened. And therefore, its relation with democracy gets varied from time to time, situation to situation. Okay, so in this way, new social movements, the context of new social movements are much changed. Of course, theoretical debates are there whether new social movements are entirely classless, whether new social movements are not at all based on economy. So these are some protagonists have been there from the West, and they've been understanding these phenomena from different angle. But we all know that class, economy, in fact, in 2003 or 2023 also play their role much, and that cannot be avoided academically. Okay. Now, after knowing all these, I will now shift to its relation. Am I audible? Anyone?
Yes, sir, you are perfectly audible.
Okay. So the point is that now I am shifting to the relationship between, I have 15 minutes time, the relationship between social movements and democracy. Now see, I have already mentioned the name of Rajni Kothari. Rajni Kothari very aptly, he said, I'm just quoting, social movements without clarity of ideology and organization may prove counterproductive. It can be used by the forces which have no faith in democracy. Point is that I said that throughout the ages, social movements have been having their role. Obviously, I have given the examples of Glorious Revolution, American War of Independence, all these, and even today. I'm not going into that in details, but the narratives we have, I'm just referring to. Andolan koril nokorile eku napai. Okhomok khodai mahimakor sokure saisil ba sai. So these are the narratives we have heard, and academically we need to address all these. Okay, and to understand all these, we have lot many scholars. They have already threw their lights on all these. Now, what Rajni Kothari said, I'll come to that. I've just given you one hint how he dealt with that. I mean, while initiating his own idea on direct action, he referred this also. My point is that, as I initially remarked in this lecture, that social movements, in fact, are the engagements of people from the below, which can make you understand politics from true sense. Secondly, when you say the last movement against Citizenship Amendment Act, so people participated, right? When people participate, that means, people, they get to engage in the socio-political life, which in fact is a good sign for democracy. Success of democracy depends on enlarging the participation of its people, of its citizens. Social movements do that. Okay, social movements expands mobilization on the part of the people. And then, one more thing, the elite composition, it's quite important. See, initially, after the penetration of the British, I'm just giving you one example from Assam. After the penetration of the British in the land of Assam, what we had? We had Assamese intelligentsia, initially backed by Anandaram Dekyal Pukon, Moniram Devan. They pleaded in front of British for the introduction of Assamese as language in the office and in the schools, in courts. And ultimately in 1873 it was given. So the point is that during that time, you didn't have a kind of community-based elites. You had elite, you have intelligentsia from Assam as such. Assamese intelligentsia, of course, based on the caste Hindu-based Assamese middle class. But now see the context in the post-independence period in Assam. What we had observed, like you have elites from every corner of the society, of the community. So it's a good sign from that sense. Democracy is being strengthened. Now see, even in Bodoland today, say Bodos demanded after 85, Bodos demanded that divide Assam 50-50. right? So that was the context in 85. Now in 2023, see how within Bodoland you have fragmentations, right? The way you had the demarcation in 85 between the Bodos and non-Bodos or so-called Assamese, and now what you have within the Bodoland, you have the micro divisions. So both these macro and micro context ultimately enlarged the whole context, whole composition of elite. So that in fact is strengthened, is enlarged by social movements. So in that way, social movements in any form, I'm not referring unconstitutional forms, of course. So social movements strengthen democratic temperament, okay, through participation, through mobilization, through formation of elites from different corners of the society. And at the same time, I think many college teachers and students are there. You maybe in your colleges you have grievance redressal cell. You are having, I suppose colleges are having grievance redressal cell. And social movements are also, by some scholars, they argue that social movements are like redressal of grievances. So social movements through all these, strengthens democracy. Because what is democracy at all? I mean, what is democracy after all? It's kind of the enhancement of people's rights, isn't it? So how can people's rights be strengthened? Through their participation, through making them aware about their own rights. And how can that rights be achieved if it is not given normally, adequately by the system which is supposed to give it, right? So in that way, social movements apparently strengthens democracy. There is no doubt in that. So social movement, the interplay and interface between social movements and democracy are much more, cooperative. Social movements strengthen democracy, and democracy has its meaning. I mean, social movements strengthen democracy from this sense, and democracy gives meaning to social movements, because in other forms of politics, forms of system, social movements cannot have their meaning. Okay, so this is one of the coins, one side of the coin. Now, some other academicians, like, say, I will give you one example. India achieved its independence in 47. So Indian national movement was there up to 47. We achieved independence. And after independence also, we have witnessed some movements of different nature when we were being ruled by our own people, not by the foreigners, by our own people. So then those scholars articulated the whole dynamics and said that social movements, in fact, or much movements, much mobilization, in fact, paralyzes the system, the state, and make democracy dysfunctional. And they said that their argument was that India achieved its independence in 47, just it's very much infant. So it needs time to get matured to address the socio-political, economic, cultural aspects of its citizens. And if much agitation is seen, that agitation will end up with making the system paralyzed, dysfunctional. So that was also one of the views given by some of the scholars, keeping the context of the kind of post-independent India's movement politics. Now again, say in case of social movements, what was Gandhi's view? What Gandhi said, I have already mentioned that means is much important. So Gandhian view, Gandhian approach won't adhere the movements being initiated by United Liberation Front of Assam. Of course, there's a different definitional problem we have in understanding social movements by different scholars. So, I mean, initially I said that whether social movements are successful, whether social movements have been promoting democracy or not, to understand that, you need to understand the components I have already said. The leadership, the organization, ideology, objectives, and program. Say, recently we had the movement against Citizenship Amendment Act. Academic write-up we have, which have addressed lot many issues. The way leadership, organizational leadership dealt with them, whether they had kind of any interest on their part, how it has been visualized in the aftermath of the movement, right? In the same way, during Assam movement also in 80s, you had EPW debates, economic and political weekly debates, right? So there also scholars argued how social movement, I mean how Assam movement, I mean the programs being used in Assam movement became violent, and they were not bringing more democratization in the society. Of course, there are diverse views. These are not my views. I'm just representing, I'm just making my point stronger by giving these diverse views by different scholars. So to understand impacts of social movements in terms of their success and failure, and in terms of how these are being linked with democracy, to understand that, you need to understand the leadership, organization, the leadership, and the object, most importantly, the ideology being used by them. Okay. And I think, although, I mean, I will refer to books. I have in different cases, I have gone through these two books for this lecture, basically by Christopher Jaffrelot. Although these books are not primarily on social movements, but to link it with democracy, I have referred it, like Christopher Jaffrelot's book on Modi's India, Hindu nationalism and the rise of ethnic democracy. And for that reason, Francis Fukuyama's last book, that is Identity, Demand for Dignity and the Politics of Resentment. In these two books, I basically gone through how the context and the contours of democracy is being changed in different societies, and how the new concept like ethnic democracy deals with the socio-political aspirations from different sections of the society. Now, say in Assam, you have many demands from different sections of the society. So now what will these lead to? What will these movements lead to? So there lies two contexts to understand all these dynamics. One is whether these are the problems of federal building or these are the problems of nation building. It's a very scholarly debate. It's very interesting. You may go through. I mean, the demands and the movements in Northeast India primarily, whether these are the concerns for federal building or nation building. Some scholars, they argue that yes, these are the concerns of federal building, but the state don't address these issues from federal building perspective. They address these issues through nation building context. Okay, so I mean, Christopher Jaffelet and Francis Fukuyama, these recent books may give us the perspective. On the other hand, if we understand, you know, Chomsky's understanding of, you know, manufacturing consent, and in that case, I can refer the other frame, that is shifting of attention. How our attention is being shifted from the core to the periphery. How our consent is being manufactured unknowingly. How through repeated advertisements we are being compelled to think from the direction as it is directed. So these are, I mean, from that sense, social movements may be the outcomes from the people from the below, obviously. But at the same time, if you go through Noam Chomsky, if you go through Fukuyama and Christopher Jaffelet for this region, we may get different perspective. I mean, the state regime or the, I mean, for that region, the above may create kind of movements for their own region, for their own interest, right? So diverting our attention, so shifting our attention from the core to the periphery, the state may initiate some kind of programs which may in fact give the name of social movement, right? For that region, I mean, we may get different perspectives I have already given, and in these ways, the interface of social movements and democracy can be understood. I think I should leave now, and I will definitely welcome questions from the teachers here. So thank you so very much for your patient listening, and I hope I have covered these aspects, and I have framed in my own way. I have conceptualized the whole understanding of social movement and the changing contours of it, and of course, the changing interplay and interface of social movements and democracy, and recently how different perspectives by different academicians give us a new impetus to think on or to rethink on this aspect. Thank you so very much, particularly the fraternity of Gorgaon College, headed by Bhagyashree Mahanto Dangoria and Shivsagar College. And Lucky by the way is here. I have seen the name. Yovraj is there, Pabanda is there. Pabanda, in fact, invited me. Thank you so very much. And Obita is there. Obita is our student. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for your wonderful deliberation. And I'm quite sure that your insights will definitely provide put forward thought to our audience, and they will understand now in a better way the dynamics of social movements. So now the floor of the webinar is open for discussion. I request all the participants, if they have any question, they can ask our resource person directly. আপোনালোকৰ যদি কিবা প্ৰশ্ন আছে আপোনালোকে পোনপটীয়াকৈ আমাৰ সমল ব্যক্তিক সামাজিক আন্দোলনৰ বিষয়ে যিকোনো ধৰণৰ প্ৰশ্ন সুধিব পাৰিব। So the floor is open for discussion. You can ask your queries. Probably they don't have query at this moment, but I'm sure that definitely they are going to have which they are going to ask you later. So now I request Dr. Pawan Gogoi to deliver his vote of thanks to all concerned. Over to our HOD, Dr. Pawan Gogoi. Sir, are you there?
Dhanabad. Yeah, I am here. Thank you, Zubair. Thank you, forum. আমি আচলতে আমি এই বিষয়টো আজি আমি এই বিষয়টোৰ ওপৰত আমি একেবাৰে নতুন বা আমাৰ একেবাৰে নতুন আছিল গতিকে সেইকাৰণে আমাৰ পৰৱৰ্তী দিনত আমি আৰু অনুষ্ঠান
স্যার আপনার ভয়েসটো অকমান
অহা নাই নেকি
এতিয়া আহিছে
আমি খুব আনন্দিত হৈছো যে আমাৰ এটা সামান্য অনুৰোধতে আমাক সময় অলপ দিলে গতিকে আমি এই অনুষ্ঠানটো সহযোগ নাথাকিলেহেঁতেন আমি এইটো সম্পূৰ্ণ কৰিব নোৱাৰিলোহেঁতেন যিহেতুকে আমি সকলোৱে জানো যে আজিৰ অনুষ্ঠানটো আমাৰ আৰু তাত আছে এখন পেপাৰ আৰু পেপাৰ লেভেলতো আমাৰ আমি তাৰ লগত সংগতি আৰু ইয়াৰ ইম্পেক্ট অন ডেম'ক্ৰেচি তাৰ ওপৰত ভিত্তি কৰি তাৰ ওপৰত আমাৰ কিছু আমি আহ্বান জনাইছোঁ আৰু তেখেতৰ পৰা আমি সেই আহ্বানৰ পাই আমি বৰ আনন্দিত হৈছোঁ গতিকে প্ৰথমে আমি ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমি ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয় তেখেতে আমাৰ অনুষ্ঠানটোক এই অভিনয়খন কাৰণে আমাক যথেষ্ট তেখেতৰ উৎসাহিত আমি অনুষ্ঠানটো আজি এই আপাহতে আমি তেখেতক কৰিছোঁ ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ ৰীণা সন্দিকৈ বাইদেউ তেখেতেও আমাক কৰিছে আৰু যিহেতুকে আমি এই কলাবৰেশ্যন যদি আমি পাতিছোঁ সেইবাবে আমি সোণাৰী মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগৰ
স্যার ভয়েসটো অলপ অস্পষ্টকে আহিছে অলপ ডাঙৰকে কৈ দিব
বিনোদ কনিকৰ শুনিছানে এতিয়া যুগল শুনিছানে
হয় ঠিকে আছে
আমি বিনোদ কনিকৰ সোণাৰী মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ ৰাজনীতি বিজ্ঞান বিভাগৰ HOD আমি ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ লগে লগে আমি ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ পাতি তেখেতৰ লগত আমি যোগাযোগ সফল কৰি তুলিবৰ কাৰণে ল'বৰ কাৰণে আমি চেষ্টা কৰিছিলোঁ গতিকে তেখেতৰ সহায়ৰ কাৰণে আমি অশেষ ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয় IPS তেখেতৰ ইনিচিয়েটিভতে আজি আমাৰ যিখন ৱেবিনাৰ হ'ল টেকনিকেল কাম আছিল টেকনিকেল কামবিলাক তেওঁৰ যোগেদি তেওঁ এটা গতিকে তেখেতক আমি এপাহতে ধন্যবাদ কৰিছোঁ ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ সোণাৰী মহাবিদ্যালয় অন্যান্য যিসকল ফেকাল্টি মেম্বাৰ আছে আমি তেখেতৰ মতে আছে তেখেতক আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ আৰু আমাৰ ইয়াৰ লগে লগে আমি আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয়ৰ যিসকল ফেকাল্টি মেম্বাৰ আছে তেওঁলোকক আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ আৰু লগে লগে আমাৰ মহাবিদ্যালয় আৰু সোণাৰী তেওঁলোকক আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ আৰু বিশেষভাৱে আমি পুনৰবাৰ আমি ধন্যবাদ জ্ঞাপন কৰিছোঁ বৰুণ ডাঙৰীয়া তেখেতে আমাৰ অনুৰোধ ৰক্ষা কৰি আজি আমাৰ সফলভাৱে ৰূপায়ণ কৰাৰ ক্ষেত্ৰত যিখিনি সহায় সহযোগিতা বা যিখিনি কথা তেওঁ ক'লে যিহেতু তেওঁ এই বিষয়ৰ লগত এই বিষয়ত এক্সপাৰ্ট গতিকে তেখেতৰ পৰা আমি আৰু জানিবলগীয়া আছে বা থাকিব আমি পৰৱৰ্তী দিনত তেখেতৰ লগত আমি আকৌ পাতিবৰ কাৰণে তেতিয়া তেখেতে যাতে আমাক সহায় জনায় তাৰ বাবে আমি এতিয়া এই আপাহতে তেখেতক আমি অনুৰোধ জনাইছোঁ গতিকে আমি গোটেই অনুষ্ঠানটো সাফল্যমণ্ডিত কৰি তোলাৰ বাবে যিসকল ইয়াতে অজ্ঞাতে বা যিসকলৰ নাম আমি পৰা নাই তেওঁলোককো আমি ধন্যবাদ জনাইছোঁ আৰু এই অনুষ্ঠানটো সফল হোৱাৰ বাবে মোৰ সভাটো যুৱৰাজ
Hi. Okay. Thank you, sir, for your vote of thanks. And with this, our webinar comes to an end. So thank you, everyone. I wish you a very good evening. Thank you.